Here's a question. What is the most powerful color in human history? Not the prettiest, not the rarest, the one that could kill, that could build empires. We're going through 10 colors today. Every single one is gone. Not faded, not synthetic. The original is gone. And every one starts with a question that actually matters. What if the most royal color in ancient history smelled like death? Tyrian purple. The color only Roman emperors were allowed to wear. Unauthorized wearing was punishable by execution. It was made from the mucus of 10,000 sea snails left to rot on a Mediterranean beach until it turned from white to green to a deep, blood-dark violet. 1 pound of dye, thousands of dead shells. The Phoenicians perfected it around 1500 BCE. The color was so stable a garment could be worn for 100 years. But the snails were overexploited. When Constantinople fell in 1453, the exact fermentation process vanished. Everything called royal purple since is an imitation. Now here's a question that sounds like a joke. What if the warmest brown in Renaissance paintings is literally made from dead people? Mummy brown, used by European painters from the 1500s to the 1800s, especially the pre-Raphaelites, because it gave shadows a warmth no synthetic could match. The pigment was actual Egyptian mummies ground up with asphalt and myrrh. This was not just a supply chain running out. It was the moment when human aesthetic appetite collided with an ethical boundary. Robersons of London ran out of actual mummies in 1964. Tried substitutions. It was not the same. What if the most fashionable color of the 19th century was slowly killing everyone who wore it? Scheele's green. Invented by Carl Schayler in 1775. An arsenic-based copper pigment. The green of a fresh leaf, if that leaf were dipped in slow poison. It swept through Victorian England. Wallpaper, book bindings, children's toys, dress fabrics. When the air was humid, it released arsine gas. Invisible, odorless, cumulative. There's a theory, still debated, that Napoleon died partly from the green wallpaper in his room on St. Helena. When his body was exhumed in the 1950s, his hair showed 17 times the normal level of arsenic. By the 1880s, the color was retired, but not before it poisoned an entire century of homes. Now a different question. What color survived the collapse of an entire civilization? And why can we barely make it anymore? Maya blue, used by the ancient Maya for their most sacred murals. Made from indigo combined with a rare clay called palygorskite at specific temperatures. It resists nearly all known solvents and acids. In the murals of Bonampak in Chiapas, painted around 800 CE, it still glows today, 1,000 years in a damp tropical climate, while everything else has crumbled. When the Maya civilization collapsed, the recipe was forgotten. For centuries, no one knew how it was made. Modern scientists can replicate it now, but the original tradition, the specific hands and ritual, is gone. What if an entire palace had floor-to-ceiling panels made from this, and then the mountain ran out? Russian Malachite green, a deep, layered green from the Ural Mountains, unlike any other malachite on Earth. In the 1800s, the Winter Palace had malachite panels floor-to-ceiling. St. Isaac's Cathedral had columns weighing several tons. Entire rooms built around the color as if the stone was the architecture. The mines were exhausted by the 1870s. The largest single mass ever found was used entirely. What if the most radiant yellow in Renaissance art came from suffering cows? Indian yellow. Renaissance painters described it as carrying its own light. In 1883, investigators traced its origin. The urine of cows fed nothing but mango leaves. The cows were kept chronically dehydrated. That urine was collected, dried, and formed into balls. Because the cow is sacred in India, public outrage led to a ban in 1908. The color ceased to exist. What if the most expensive blue in the world cost more than gold and came from a single valley? Ultramarine, made from lapis lazuli mined in the Bh Dakshan province of Afghanistan. A piece of raw lapis cost more by weight than gold. The extraction took weeks, ground, washed, settled repeatedly, keeping only the finest blue particles. Because of the cost, painters used it almost always for the Virgin Mary's robe, the most expensive color in the world, for the most sacred figure in Christian art. The specific grade that produced the classical blue of Giotto and Bellini is essentially gone. What if the red that funded an empire came from a tiny bug on a cactus? Cochineal, a microscopic insect on prickly pear cactus in Mexico. When dried, crushed, and mixed with aluminium salts, it becomes a red dye 10 to 12 times more potent than anything Europe had known. When Spanish conquistadors found it in the 1520s, they established a strict monopoly. For over a century, Spain controlled the world's red. It funded Habsburg Wars, British redcoats, Baroque paintings across Europe. The reds that still look vivid today are cochineal. Synthetic dyes in the 1850s collapsed the market. The real thing is now extremely rare. What if the warmest white in your grandmother's china is made from bones? Bone ash white, made from animal bone burned at very high temperatures into calcium hydroxyapatite powder. Josiah Spode's bone china, invented in the 1740s, required at least 30% bone ash to legally carry the name. That bone ash is what gives bone china its warm ivory glow, unlike cold porcelain white. The tradition continues, but the specific pre-industrial batches, made from specific animals, burned in specific ways, is part of that lost world of handmade things. And one more. What if the most beautiful glass in Victorian homes glowed because it was radioactive? Uranium yellow. In the 1830s, glassmakers discovered that adding uranium dioxide to molten glass produced a yellow-green that fluoresces bright emerald under ultraviolet light. In ordinary daylight, it looks like pale honey. Vaseline glass. The 1940s brought nuclear regulation that ended its golden age. A brief revival in the 1950s was short-lived. The objects remain in museums, in antique shops, still faintly radioactive, still glowing in the dark. Here's the question I want to leave you with. Colors are not just wavelengths of light. They are origin stories. They are geographies. They are specific hands, in specific places, at specific moments. Crushing a snail, grinding a stone, stressing a cow, burning a bone. When those chains break, the color becomes unrepeatable, a specific, irreplaceable moment in the history of human making. Every one of these colors was real. Every one was used. Every one was beautiful in a way no chemical substitute has fully captured. And every one is gone.